Hi, welcome to Diversity Comic Con. We have the pleasure today of being with incredible guests to talk about marginalization comics. And before we head to it, I want to give a few thanks to the FIT Diversity Council, Dr. Joyce Brown, FIT President, Chief Diversity Officer Ron Milan, Michael from Getting Tune. Hi, Michael, and our good friend Raymond Gill for bringing us all together here. I want to introduce our panelists today, but before, let me just state who I am. My name is Fabrice Sapolsky, and I'm an immigrant creator living in LA. I am the co-creator, writer of Spider-Man Noir, for those who know that character, and a few other graphic novels that I wrote and published independently. And now I have this company called FairSquare Comics, where I'm promoting and publishing stories from underrepresented categories of creators, which I call comics for the rest of us. And speaking of the rest of us, we're all with the rest of us today, and we're absolutely awesome, all of us. And I want to introduce first Regine Sawyer. Regine is the coordinator and founder of Women in Comics Collective International and writer-publisher at Lock It Down Production. Hi, Regine. And for those who don't know Women in Comics, please go to the website, check, register, take a membership. This is absolutely awesome, and it's totally worth it. And I'm a huge fan of what Regine is accomplishing there. That's for Regine. Amy Chu. She's a writer for Marvel, DC, Netflix, everybody. You name it, Amy has it. She was the first female writer to write Kiss. She has a bunch of graphic novels at every possible publisher ever, and she's awesome. She's the best, and also her donut game is beyond compare. She's the best, and I'm also a fan of Amy. And there's Omar. Omar is an independent comic creator, originally from Cincinnati, and now I think in New York. And Omar is the co-creator of an independent comic book called ZIndan, The Lost Ansars. Am I pronouncing it well?
Yeah, you got it. ZIndan.
ZIndan, okay. There are like 4 issues published, and it's with Shahad Shah, and it's available on Comixology and on their website, www.thelastsansars.com. So guys, we of course are going to talk about how it is to be marginalized and what it means to be marginalized in this industry that we love so much. But before that, like, I wanted to start with the definition. So the first thing when I was preparing this panel was to get back to the Oxford definition of what marginalization means. And so it is exactly, and I'm reading and I'm quoting, treatment of a person, group, or concept as insignificant or peripheral. So the first question that I want to ask all of you before we delve into this topic is, when did you realize, if you did, that you were a marginalized creator, or how did it manifest for you guys? Regine, you want to start?
Sure. Well, when I first started specifically in the comic book industry, I never thought about myself being marginalized, and I never thought about myself being a Black woman. I was just a person that loved the medium, and I loved writing, and that's what I had always done. It wasn't until that I started going into spaces such as conventions, specifically, not so much comic book shops, ironically, but conventions where everybody wanted to let me know that I was a woman and that I was Black. Everyone wanted to let me know that I was cute. You know, everyone wanted to let me know, like, oh, you're such a sexy lady. That's nice. What does that have to do with my work? And you know, for me, it was just like, what is this? Like, this is ridiculous, but not so much unsurprising. And of course, I didn't let that stop me, but it's always something that I'm mindful of because it continues to this day to whatever extent. You're on mute, Fabrice.
Yes, I mean, I said that's a shame, because we know that you're all full of energy and talent, and we want to see more of you. Amy, what's your story?
Oh, wow. So similar to Regine, except I think I was fully aware of it probably from the very start. And I would say that probably it is responsible for me being in comics because, you know, I mean, when you tell me, or exactly that kind of behavior is exhibited, not necessarily maliciously, but on a sort of microaggression basis constantly, that kind of gets me like, well, you don't think I can do it. You're going to put me in the other category. Now I have to show you that I can do it. So when you were talking about me doing all this stuff, part of the motivation is like, just, well, you know, I got a chip on my shoulder to prove that obviously, it's an opportunity to represent. Now that I'm actually finally in that category where I can work for almost all the major publishers, that I have that opportunity to represent, but also just, you know, try to break that barrier of the other, you know, and I think that's very important because especially for newer creators, you know, younger creators, they need to, we need to move away from that, oh, well, the diversity hire, or, well, you know, we'll give the short stories to the people of color, and that way we'll seem more diverse. I mean, that's ongoing, right?
Or there's this excuse of like giving some work to the creators of color, but then not following up, which is something that we're going to talk about.
We are never, almost never, I shouldn't say never, almost never really at the top of the list of like, okay, so let's, you know, let's fill the ranks, and then, oh, well, we need to get some white people in to just round it out. That never happens, right? It's just not the way it works. So, so yeah, that basically, that's the story of my entire career in comics.
All right. Omar?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, I'll echo exactly what Regine and Amy said, but I think for me it started as recognizing I was being marginalized as a consumer first. So I grew up on comic books and not seeing myself represented in any of the stories, even though I loved all the stories, but I never could see myself in any of the stories. Really kind of inspired me to say, okay, look, I can't sit around and wait for other people to start writing about, you know, stories that maybe I would care about. I need to start doing it myself. And so that's when I really kind of jumped into the industry, and then noticed right away that there was not a lot of people like myself that were being platformed in any way in comics. And so we had to kind of really fight, and we are still very much fighting for that platform. And so, you know, it really started from like the consumption. And then obviously once I got into working in comics, I really saw it even more, and really kind of put two and two together and explain why you see such an absence of representation. Because, you know, on the creator side, you don't see that, you know, inclusion of diversity. And so, you know, I'm working to hopefully take a few steps and advance that envelope in terms of diversity in creatorship, so that we can really provide stories and opportunities for our folks to really connect and feel represented and connected.
Well, I feel that it's a never-endless fight that we will have to be on for the rest of our lives. This is a mission that has no due date or end date. What do you guys think that comics provide that makes your heart beat for them, and that no other part of entertainment has? Because like we're all fighting in this industry for recognition, to be seen. And what makes comics so special that we really want to fight for them? Who wants to speak first?
Well, I'll go. I'm like the reverse of Omar. You know, I didn't really read comics. I read a few graphic novels. I read Mouse, you know, and I'm sure I read, I don't even remember it in college. So I'm the reverse. But part of the whole thing of also not just trying to prove a point, you know, like 10 years of my life to prove a point is kind of crazy, although, you know, it worked. But, you know, part of it too is really discovering a love and passion for the medium, because I have never, sure, there's lots of, I mean, we're all exposed to everything, you know, streaming, Netflix, whatever, but there's a certain purity to comics that once you become, not just from when you move from consumption side to creator side, there's kind of like this magic, that you as an individual can do it. What, in business terminology, the barriers to entry for comics, in my opinion, are very low compared to anything else. Anyone else who wants to make a movie and try to represent, you got to raise a couple million, just about everything else has a barrier. But comics, anyone can do it. You can do your own little doodle and put it on Instagram, and you have a comic. So I think there's a certain magic to that not just from the creation standpoint, but also the consumption. I mean, it's so exciting. There's so much going on, that I don't know. I can't get out of it now. I don't know. It doesn't make any more sense now.
True. Regine?
I mean, for me, comics just always married the things that I love the most. I loved art and I loved writing. And when I was younger, I used to draw a lot. And when I first picked up a comic, it was just like, this is what I love. This is what I enjoy doing. I mean, my mother was a painter, and all we had in the house were just tons of art books, tons of books about design. And it was just something that just made my heart go aflutter. And I was really blessed to have a family that encouraged that, because they had a similar love of the arts and the written word, and it just always stuck with me. So when I got older, it seemed pretty natural for me to want to be, in the medium in some capacity, but definitely as a writer. So, here I am. I'm not going anywhere.
Yay. Omar, you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the artistic aspect of it, I think there's something nice to comics in which there's still a love for like the analog in an era that's going totally digital. There's still a desire to have something physical in hand. The collection aspect of it, many of us are drawn into comics from like a collector's standpoint. And then, I think the other thing that resonates with me is that, comics has always been sort of an expression for people that have felt marginalized or like othered. If you think about even some of the greatest characters that we have written by Jewish boys in, New York City who felt, excluded. And so I think that the idea that this would be the medium for us to express how we feel marginalized, it just makes total sense. And
I was about to say that, because like the DNA of our industry is marginalization. You had this group of boys, they were like 15, 16, sometimes 11. Joe Kubert was only 11 when he started his career, and they had nothing else. They had no money, they had no education, they had nowhere to go, and they started drawing those things. And you had a bunch of predators saying, "Oh, let's make business out of this," and this is how it all started. But like, isn't that the mirage finally? Because like we're all witness of that fact that, as Amy was saying, and Regine and you too, Omar, after, it's easy and accessible to make comics. Everyone can make them. But at the same time, we're all experiencing some kind of a trouble moving up. And this is where the mirage is. So what do you have to say about that? Like, how do you analyze the fact that at one point we're stuck?
Well, so I mean, I think there's a couple things here. What you're talking about is the marginalization of the mainstream comics, right? Particularly superhero. And I think that is a huge issue. But at the same time, I think we also need to be aware of what I was talking about earlier, that we no longer need validation really from DC and Marvel to pursue a career in this business, with the advent of
technology. Amy, but like, even if you look at book publishers right now, you can't go and say, "Oh, I have a graphic novel, I'm going to sell it to Random House, or I'm going to sell it to Simon & Schuster or Little Brown or anything." You have to either know an editor there or have an agent that will be good enough and convinced enough to place you there. So there's another barrier in that mainstream.
Absolutely. But I think there is less I need to be careful here, because I do follow this, and I do look at the numbers, and I'm very, I'm not saying that these problems don't exist. They absolutely do exist. But also I want to be very careful to also let people know that you don't let it stop you from pursuing anything in this business, okay? Because there are so many, let's not discount the number of creators that we see on crowdfunding platforms outselling DC and Marvel titles. All you have to do is just go and look at the numbers on Comic-Con, for example, and look at the actual numbers and the sales and how much people are making. So, I would definitely look at that, and then go back to Kickstarter and look at the people of color who are actually doing projects there. So I think that you need to balance that. Now, once again, we're talking, like, especially when you're talking about book publishing, the mainstream book publishers, in addition to DC and Marvel, have been dominated by white people, dominated by, gender is a whole nother thing though. In book publishing, women dominate in certain places. So there's that, but, I think there is huge movement and huge strides going on in the book publishing right now. So to sort of say we're marginalized there, probably so in the prose area, but I'm seeing a lot of movement in especially YA middle grade books, that I'm not sure I could say that it's, we're so marginalized anymore in that area, because there is there's a significant number of editors in that space who I would describe as being incredibly woke, so much more so than any other business I've ever been in. So addressing that, Fabrice, but at the same time say, let's look at what's going on literally in the last couple of years. So it's very encouraging.
Okay. Omar?
Yeah, I guess to speak to maybe both points is that the barrier to entry to creating a comic is very low as compared to maybe other medias, in terms of, like, you don't need a $5 or $10 million startup to create a comic book. You could effectively do that with a piece of paper and an idea. And I think maybe what you're speaking to is the challenge of then taking that idea and getting it out there, marketing it and distributing it, and some of the challenges of like the post-production. Once you've completed the project, how do you now make that successful? And then we do have, the benefit of like a lot of tools that maybe we didn't have access to a decade or even 2 decades ago, like Kickstarter and stuff that can really help, launch somebody's project. But it is definitely challenging, in some ways. What's the measure of success for us in terms of our voices? Is it just simply creating the artwork, or is it then getting mass consumption? And I think that's where a lot of us struggle. Sometimes we don't feel successful or validated until we've got that Marvel DC sort of, stamp on our work. But then I think Amy makes an excellent point, which is, we don't need validation from some of those places anymore. And I think sometimes what we're starting to see is that people are quite successful without those incredibly massive, corporations behind you. And I think that's the real, true success, is when people don't have those, resources and are still able to do incredible work, if not better work. And so I think that that's exciting. And I think that that's maybe the place that we're really, succeeding.
I mean, let's look at Spike Trotman, Iron Circuits, and let's look at her sales numbers. I mean, phenomenal. I bring this up at every single panel. It's like, let's stop measuring ourselves by what other people are doing. Spike is a great example. Where I think we need to be careful, though, is the next step up. Everyone's talking about transmedia, when you own your own IP. And now the next level is, TV, streaming, film. Now I think there's true marginalization going on, because people are like, okay, we're looking for the next Crazy Rich Asians, but we're looking for one Crazy Rich Asians. It's not like, so we're getting into that problem, I think. So, again, I don't think this problem goes away, but at the same time, I want to emphasize you got people like Spike Trotman who are doing phenomenal. And Spike's not the only one. There's so many other people who are just forging their own path and being entrepreneurial and not letting this stop them from, pursuing what they want to do.
Do we lose Fabrice?
I think we lost Fabrice. I see a question from Ramon that do we think that there are advantages to being a person of color making comics? Wow. I don't know if that was supposed to be like some kind of provocative question.
I think so.
what we were supposed to say, yeah, you know, like, it's advantageous to be an Asian female trying to get into mainstream comics. Like, I'm supposed to like sidle up to a bar and expect an editor to buy me a drink because that happens. You know, it's like, excellent. That is a real advantage, that they are really interested more in buying me a drink than looking at my work, right? I mean, so I think that's a very slippery slope to talk about. Oh, is it advantageous? You know, that's, you know, whatever.
I think it's probably what you consider, what are advantages? You know, it's like, what is the advantage of if I'm going to speak about myself, it's the advantage of being Black? What's the advantage of being a woman? And I can't think of any.
Well, I think it's all the perspective, you know? Like, I really think
it is about perspective.
Yeah, like a lot of the stories I write, like, you know, Poison Ivy and Red Sonja, you know, I would say I do try to make them diverse, but I also, it's not like I have to. They're really more reflective of our society today. Our society is way more diverse that's being reflected in mainstream media and comics. So I'm really sort of, you know, trying to fix, you know, how we're represented, you know, not in a disproportionate way. You know, you can have 2 Asians, 2 Blacks, 2 Latinos in a scene, you know, you don't just do one, right? And they're like, whoa, now you're being super diverse, too diverse. It's like, well, no, actually, sometimes you can have 3, but I won't go there because I know people are going to be like, no, really? You know, so.
It's like, that's so unrealistic. But it looks like Ramon has another question.
It does.
How much of your experience regarding race goes into your work? Omar?
This is an interesting one. I think it's twofold. I mean, you know, being a brown Muslim person in a post 9/11 world, it's like impossible not to have some of that infused into your work. I think less so in sort of our ZIndan series, definitely a lot more in my Incapable Trump series. But, you know, it's hard to escape that. I think that that's just the reality and the lens from which you know, will experience the world. And I think that that's maybe, if there's any advantage to our work, that is the advantage, that we can bring a completely different perspective to a creative piece of work that maybe hasn't been seen before, bringing a new aesthetic, which is sort of refreshing and invigorating, rather than seeing, you know, another Metropolis over and over again. You know, it's that sort of lens or perspective that I think is, you know, undeniable in most of our works, and I think is also our advantage.
Yeah, I'm. It's a funny question for me in that. Oh, that's okay. Hey, we're Fabrice's dad.
That's Spectrum. You can thank Spectrum for.
I'm just waiting for Verizon to like screw me over because it's been doing that all day.
Yeah.
You know?
Welcome to LA.
Yeah, really quickly, in terms of sort of following off what Omar said, I'm a little bit different, partly because I have total imposter syndrome, by the way. You know, I'm not even supposed to be a writer. So I feel like I'm constantly proving myself, and it's taken me a while to even get comfortable about putting in a real Asian American experience in my stories, because I feel like I constantly have to prove that I can write from someone else's perspective first to achieve legitimacy. And so I've been doing that for the last few years. You know, I need to prove to everybody that I can write from a male perspective. I can write from a different, you know, just about anything but an Asian female perspective. So I'm only just now getting around to feeling comfortable about, well, now I can finally write an Asian female story, maybe. I don't know. So yeah, I've been avoiding it, is what I'm trying to say.
I think for me, in regards to putting race in my work, when I'm writing, I can't help but to put my experience into the spaces and experiences of people I know and experience of my history. I mean, it just happens. It's sort of a organic thing. I think the interesting part is I think that as I'm writing these stories and, you know, sending them out to publishers and such, or just writing for myself, let me make sure my black sheep doesn't fall behind my head. That the question has become like, what is the Black experience? What is the nuance within that, and how that's questioned, And when folks feel uncertain about what that experience is, and if you have the capability to tell that story, even though you yourself are a Black person, I mean, that has been an interesting part of the process when putting that into my work and having to sometimes explain myself and sort of being put in this position of defending my experience as a Black woman, as a Black person, as defending my culture and where I come from and where we come from. So that's been an interesting part of the process. But even as I've been put in positions to defend it, I don't stop doing what I'm doing. I think that's probably some of the challenges that some creators are going through at this juncture, where there's all these calls for all these different stories, right? I see Omar's laughing, but it's like you see all these calls, right, for all these stories, and people are like, we want you, we want you, we want you, we want your story, and then they get your story, like, oh no, we don't want this story. Like we're not sure if this is what experience is this you're talking about. It's like my communities. So that's my answer to that question. Thank you, Ramon. Thank you so much. Good question.
You know, I think it's also interesting because it must be so exhausting to have to speak for everybody. You know what I mean? And to say, like, I have the definitive, you know, Black experience, the definitive brown experience, the definitive, you know, Asian American experience, and to represent everybody. And I think that speaks to the fact that there's so few of us in this space that sometimes there's this pressure to feel like we have to cover everybody's story. And so, you know, it's interesting. And I think probably one of the challenges of also, you know, a lot of attention on diversity and inclusion sometimes is really like, well, we want this specific diverse story. We don't want your, you know, experience.
And sometimes it's just that they will come and say, we like your ideas, but we just don't want you to do it. And I've been in this country for 5 years, and let me tell you this: it's very hard to be a visible minority in this country in publishing, but it's even harder when your first language is not English, and you have to justify that you understand everything that people say to you enough so that you can write and be a part of the system. So I mean, I think everyone has their own sort of challenges. Which leads me to another part of the panel that I wanted to implement, which is kind of a game. I'm going to give you guys some keywords, and you are going to react to that. Some of them are pretty neutral. Some of them are not. Quick answer, no thinking, spontaneous as much as you can. So everybody's okay with that? All right. Let's start with one very easy. Glass ceiling. Omar, let's start with you.
Women.
Okay. Regine?
Break.
Break. Okay.
Break with a B.
Yeah. Amy?
Sucks.
Okay.
She gave you spontaneous, so.
Regine took mine, you know?
Okay.
We're in Hollywood Squares. Is this the intent?
It's good. You're doing great.
Did I just age myself?
Okay. All right. Second one. Resilience. Amy?
Oh, no. Come on. Tree.
Okay. Regine?
Me.
Ooh. I like that. Omar?
Everyone.
You guys are so much
You're
better.
not taking any risk in there, right? Okay. Stubbornness.
Oh, that's me.
Who's up for that?
Me. That's me.
That's you too. All right. Regine, that's you too. That's two. All right. Omar?
Yeah, you have to be stubborn to do comics. So
Everyone has to be
You have to
stubborn.
be stubborn or stupid.
We don't give up. That's what we do. Establishment. Establishment.
Yeah, white supremacy.
Ooh.
Destroy.
Current administration.
All right. We broke the glass ceiling of publishing in there. I like that. All right. Independence. Who's first? Freedom, Regine. Okay. Omar.
Authenticity.
That's a good one. Amy.
Embrace.
Validated.
Drinking? I think I feel like my answers would be better if I was drinking.
I have tea. I have ginger tea.
I have water.
That
Thank
sounds
you. All right. Flavor.
Flav.
Easy.
Culture.
Culture. Good. Amy.
multi-ethnic.
Okay. Nice. Rules.
Break.
Suck.
Amy.
Stupid.
Stupid. Okay. Culture shock.
Black Panther.
I can see that.
Is that a title of a comic now?
Yeah, I think, right?
It should be. Who wants to pitch that to Image?
That would sell. That would probably sell.
Maybe, because it was really substantive. I don't know. Who knows?
I mean, maybe you could put three, marginalized identities in one comic book and call it Culture Shock.
Yeah, one panel.
Yeah.
One
Panel. All in one panel.
All in one panel. That's funny. Opportunities.
Many.
Embrace.
Again. Okay.
Need it.
We'll know today that Amy embraces a lot.
I'm an embracing kind of person.
I love it. Omar, you were about to say something?
I said need it.
Needed.
Yeah.
Okay. Flakes. The first one who says editors.
I was going to
I
say
wouldn't say editors. I wouldn't say editors. I wouldn't say editors. Writers. Writers.
I don't remember what I said.
Amy, you really said writers?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Well, if we're going to go there, I would say artists. Ask me
I
how
know
many
I'm
flakes
an
on me
artist,
this
but I
month.
want to work with people, so it's easier for me as a writer to blame writers.
Omar?
I was gonna say frosted, but
Better.
Amazing. Amazing.
So, I mean, in all honesty, though, I need to defend other people too, because I've just heard so many horror stories from my artist friends about writers who have blown through their deadlines on a regular basis, and the editors allow them to do that, and that just causes repercussions for everyone down the line, and we don't acknowledge it as much as we should or call it out as much as we should, because it's in the name of somehow that the writer gets to have more time and can't quite get there in their space. A deadline is a deadline,
Yeah.
and I really do, and I will call out other writers because I can do this as a writer. I'm not saying there aren't flaky artists, but I hear way more stories about, honestly, the writers more than anything else. And one can never...
Right now, it used to be the other way around, but right now,
possibly.
yeah.
I'm talking about now in my experience. And one could never say this about colorists or letterers. They are our saviors. So I would never even dream of bringing up a letterer or colorist on that, flake scale.
Well, there's
That's
also
the other way around. My experience has been with artists in my career, and I'm a pretty fast writer. I take my licks and I keep in communication. But my experience has been with artists just flaking on me and disappearing and taking my money.
Oh yeah, no good, not good. No.
I'm totally with you there. I had a creator own with 4 different artists because they were just leaving. All right, we have a question here from the audience that is, how much support for your comic work do you get from your own community?
I'll answer first. I would like to say that my community has been pretty supportive, just roughly like overall, especially when I do local conventions. And it might be in spaces where they don't get a lot of comic book content, like they don't have creators coming to visit their neighborhoods. That's not a part of their normal life. So when they get that, they want everything. Like they want to touch everything. They almost want to touch you. Like they buy everything practically. So I would like to say that my community in general is very, very, very supportive. But it is interesting when you go outside of it, like when you go outside of it and you go to these various different shows and people are like, what is this? Who are you? What's going on here? But in general, I would like to say that my community is very supportive.
Someone else?
I hadn't really thought about this question. My automatic response is that my friends have been very supportive. The community in general, I don't want to say they're not supportive, because I mean, absolutely. I also came out of the Asian American activist community, by the way. So I think it's a little bit, the nonprofit community there have looked at it more like as an opportunity. It's like, oh, can you make a comic for us? Talking about these Asian American issues. So it's not so much of a support. It's more like, oh, awesome. We finally have somebody who can do this for us, But there's also been sort of weird, like, I don't want to say no one's not supportive. I think there's more like question marks of more like, what are you doing? Because maybe it's because I had a career change. I don't really know. So I'm not sure how to answer right now.
Omar?
I think it depends on how you define your community. I think in several ways, like the community of independent creators and Ramon, to his credit, has been like one of the big champions of this. They've been incredibly supportive, like all the the indie community. I would say if you look at it very narrowly from like maybe the South Asian perspective, it goes two ways. Either one person's like extremely excited to see representation, or other people maybe internalize some of the oppression and marginalization and kind of say like, oh, I don't want that book. I want the like mainstream book. But I think the one community that I've seen probably the most unanimous acceptance from and sort of excitement from was the Black community. And I was so embraced by them that it was just like amazing. And I think it's just such a credit to that community, particularly with all the marginalization they've faced. They still look out for, I'd say, other communities of color. So it's been amazing for me.
I'll be seconding that. And also the fact that when you go to conventions in America, independent creators are usually fans of each other. And so you don't have to ask. You go to someone else's table, you want to buy their stuff to support, and they will come to your table and they will support in return. And that's something that I've never seen in other countries. Even in my own country, original country in France, it's not like that. It's like, you're doing your thing, I'm doing my thing, and nobody's like really very supportive. But here, people are really there. They come with an open mind, and they have open hands and open wallet, which is also interesting. And it's really great, because you don't need to feel validated by any authority, because you have your peers. And we've all been in a lot of conventions. We've seen each other in a lot of conventions, and clearly this is a place of happiness when it's not toxic. It's a place of happiness where we can meet great creators and also like get a lot of feedback from them. So it's absolutely great. There's another question that came. Was there a creator of color that really inspired you?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I always want to thank Larry Hama for really helping me early in my career and being such an inspiration, and being exactly that. He looks out for everybody. Whether you're Asian, Latino, Black, white, whatever. I feel like he's got a sort of curmudgeonly reputation, but I think it's well earned. He calls it like he sees it, and so I take great inspiration from that.
Omar, Regine, who wants to go?
I mean, I think Greg Pak, love his stuff. Read it thoroughly and huge fan of him, and just how much he's done to kind of teach others and sort of bring them in. And obviously Ramon, I know Ramon has been such a huge sort of like leader in this space, especially for the indie creators, and he's done so much to organize things like this, and he's got a long history of that. So, you know, big fan of his efforts and work, and so yeah.
Regine?
Mine will always be Aletha E. Martinez. I love her immensely. She's one of the original members of Women in Comics, and she's just highly supportive of the group, of me, of the other members. And she's worked so hard, and she's been doing this for so long. And I just love her. I just love her. I'm over the moon about
and
her.
Honestly, there's no one more generous than Aletha. I've seen her panel like earlier, and she looked absolutely amazing and brilliant there. But that's who she is. She is one of the most generous people in this industry. Yes, Aletha, you're right. Aletha deserves like the medal.
All the coins, all the coins.
All the coins, yes. There's another question that just came. I don't know how to handle it, but like I'll leave it to you guys. If there was a mainstream character you could brown wash, who would it be? I always had problems with this, but you know, it's better to create new characters than trying to change existing characters. But yes, I mean, please, by any means, answer the question if you can.
Well, I think I'm going to talk a little bit. I've been thinking about this, and I do think it's okay to change characters because, you know, I think that's legitimate, and I think we need to do that. We also need to create new characters. But the sort of argument about creating new characters and not changing the original, it overlooks the very fact that there's a brand and a following for these characters. And I think to establish new characters now, you're really going an uphill battle. So I really have no problem if we want to change for whatever reason, you know, the gender, the race, whatever, have a different variation of existing character. I'm totally okay with that. But as for what that would be, I don't know, actually. I think you could do lots of very interesting permutations.
A lot has been done too.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So I'm all for that, you know, with some thought, obviously, not just a money grab, you know?
Yeah.
So I didn't really answer the question. I was just doubting.
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with Fabrice. And Amy in both ways. I think one is like, I don't think there's a particular character I would like to see, you know, race swapped or gender swapped particularly, but I can see, you know, a role for maybe investing the same treatment of a specific character into maybe a different character, or passing of a mantle to like bring up a new, you know, somebody like new in the Bat family. So like a new character, but can inherit, you know, all the history and the resources of maybe some of these more well-established and more well-invested characters. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to see maybe somebody new in the Bat family. In some way, you know, with like a different gender, different history, or you know, possibly in the X-Men mutant family. That would be another place that we could, you know,
the X-Men family was very diverse, like since
very diverse, and so that I think it lends itself naturally for the sort of introduction of new characters. And what I see, like Wolverine to like switch, you know, I don't think I would necessarily enjoy that because I really enjoy Wolverine as a character.
But at the same time, and I'll leave the mic to Regine. Wouldn't it be more accurate to say, hey, big companies, why don't you put all the marketing money on those people to establish those brands the same way you establish the others?
They don't want to. I mean, they don't want to. I think that they see the guaranteed dollar, right? You have these characters that have been set. They've been around for 50 some odd years. They're making you money. You know, why change that brand? So then that's when you have what we call washing, or someone asked the question of brown washing, where you're passing on a mantle. And so they want to just continue that on. Do I personally care for that? I would prefer new characters to be made, yes, added to the roster. But then there's so much that you have to add to that in order to, get that following, to put that marketing in, to get that work in. When in the meantime, you have the whole Bat family, that's a guaranteed dollar. Every single character can have its own story, have its own book, and they'll make bukus or whatever amount of dollars they're making. It just makes more sense for a company to do that. So I get why they would pass on the mantle. But I think maybe that's what they need to say, as opposed to when you have all these folks that get really angry. It's like, oh my God, you're zhuzhing up the character, you're adding too much, you're adding another gender, you're adding this, that, and a third. It's like, how about we just say we're passing on a mantle?
I mean, look at Miles Morales.
Yeah.
I mean, Miles made a buttload of money from Marvel and will continue doing so. Ms. Marvel, same. Okay, so sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Let's just look at it from a business standpoint and a story standpoint.
Yeah.
Those legitimate stories and great characters, and you cannot say, well, we'll do affirmative action for for the sake of diversity. Those are making buku bucks, these characters. So I don't want to be like, oh, I'm so confident that capitalism will free markets will solve the problems, but I don't want to discount that. When you take the risk, the people the consumers will respond to quality. So I'm very optimistic that things will change because editors have already changed. The gender balance of editorial staff has changed. Hollywood is slowly changing. So all these things I think will reflect it, because ultimately the census is already saying we will be majority people of color in 20 years. That's the market. So if you're not on top of that, you're going to miss out.
Then the new frontier and the new fight should be ownership, because it's great to have a diversity of casts, whether it's in the creators or the characters, but the ownership is still going to the same pockets. And that is a fight that remains to be fought. There are other questions popping up. That's great. What obstacles have you encountered internally in your head and externally to creating?
I mean, we're in a pandemic, y'all.
Yeah.
Need I say more?
COVID.
Like externally and internally, it's been ridiculous, and I need a more extreme word. To sit in front of this thing here and type up a script, or even when I'm going on the Women in Comics website and updating it, sometimes it's taxing. There's just so much that's hitting all of us in various different ways. We're all going through a struggle, and sometimes I don't feel like writing. I don't feel like making the next script. I don't feel like doing this, that, and the third, but I have to because I need to make some money. So that alone is also taxing. But I think in this day and age, that's one of probably the biggest obstacles. And again, there's definitely external obstacles. But the external obstacle, aka the pandemic, also becomes an internal one. Not to mention, all the racial disparity that's going on, the racialized violence, the administration, all that stuff. That obliterates your creativity sometimes, and a lot of the time these days. Okay, that's it.
Anyone want to?
I think for me, it's been the internalized is sometimes the internalized Orientalist perspective that I've kind of been a consumer of for my entire life living in the West, and so and also the misogyny that I've also internalized. I'll give you a good example, which is when I started ZIndan, I was like, okay, I'm going to create new female characters who are going to reflect like a very different aesthetic. And then I created this like belly dancing, ridiculous, caricature of a woman. And I thought, and it didn't occur to me until like I had some really good feedback from female readers just saying like, I understand where you're coming from. You're trying to do this, but like, have you looked at her? She looks like she's wearing like some cheap Halloween costume. And I was so embarrassed afterwards. And I realized like that even with the intention to do something right, I still had such deeply rooted misogynistic imagery about what women look like. And two, there was such an Orientalist perspective of what a woman not from here would look like. And it was so unintentional. And so fighting against that has been one of the biggest challenges in writing. But I think that's been also one of the greatest benefits, is that I've been really forced to reflect on these sort of unconscious processes that manifest in my writing, and even just some of the ways that I describe things. And I'm like, if it was a male character or if it was a different character, I would write it entirely differently. So why did I choose those specific adjectives to describe the characteristics of my character versus, when it would be a man, it'd be completely different. I wouldn't be like, oh, he had smooth skin, etc. It would be like, oh, he's tough and etc. So that's been a real interesting process, but I think it's been, really rewarding in that it's, brought my attention to some things that I didn't, consciously, think about.
Amy?
Wow, Omar is so much more cerebral than I am in his answer. I mean, my main issues is time, It's like we are in a pandemic. I got 2 kids who are home most of the time. They used to be in, that was my productivity time, right? They're in school, I can do stuff. Now they're in hybrid, they're home half the time. My husband's home. I got aging parents. I got to worry about them. It's a whole new ball game in just terms of even washing the dishes. And boy, there's a lot of dishes. I just don't understand this pandemic dishwashing thing, right? I mean, half my day seems to be washing everyone's dishes because they're just piling up, and strange things are growing in my sink. What do? You only have a certain amount of time. The more I write, the more Swamp Thing is growing in my kitchen. So, how
Make a comic about that.
I think I'm going to do that. Because also, Swamp Thing's cousin is in the fridge, too. Who knew that stuff could grow in the fridge? It's like, wow. So these are just very practical issues in terms of I should be focused on writing. I love to be focused on writing. And yet all these things, reality is taking place. Did we lose Fabrice again?
Did Spectrum strike again? I think it might have.
I think so.
So I guess there's a few more questions.
Yeah, want to read them?
Yeah. So I think one says, do you agree or disagree with this statement, and why? The more vulnerable I make myself in my writing, the better it is received by readers.
I do not like to make myself vulnerable. That is a very uncomfortable place for me to go to. So I disagree, because I actively avoid that. I don't put myself in Red Sonja. The point of writing Red Sonja is to write someone who's badass, who's not me. I don't want to put myself in there. Why would I put myself in that story? Nobody wants to read about my issues with washing dishes and, my imposter syndrome. I don't want to go there.
Everyone is an imposter syndrome, Amy. That's who we are.
But I really have it. I really do have it.
Okay, there's another question. We're going to wrap it up quickly. Do you agree or disagree with this statement, and why? The most vulnerable I make myself in my writing, the better it is received by readers. I agree. As for me, I agree. When you're honest with yourself and reveal who you are, it shows.
It's interesting. This is a conversation I've had a couple of times. This is a generational thing, I think, and that they talk about how the millennials, if we're going to use that, really fetishize vulnerability and transparency, whereas maybe some of the older generations don't necessarily feel that way. They conversely fetishize the sense of being like ever strong and never showing any vulnerability. So I think it might be a generational thing. I kind of land maybe somewhere in the middle. I think there is some value to having some vulnerability, but then I'm also deathly afraid of being entirely transparent and vulnerable in some of my writing. So I think I try to maybe ride the fence on that. But yeah, it's an interesting topic.
I don't even know. I'm not sure if I even feel vulnerable when I put myself in my writing. I I feel like if I do it, I do receive it as a strength, but also I think being able to be vulnerable to whatever extent can be considered a strength as well. So I guess I'm kind of on the fence, but kind of not. You know.
Amy?
Yeah, I'll just build off what I said before. I really look at it like it's like D&D, and I'm the dungeon master. I'm not putting myself in the story. I'm controlling the story. That's my game. You know,
You're the key master.
Experience. You know, you don't need to hear my side of the story. How right? That's how I do it.
All right. My last question, because all three of you are at very different stages in your careers, in your respective careers. What do you think is your next move to make yourself more visible in the world or in the industry? Who wants to go first?
Well, definitely, I'll do Diversity Comic Con next year. I think that's my goal.
That's great. Great answer. Regine?
I think I'm just gonna keep doing what I've been doing. I've been doing a lot of virtual panels and events and such, and that helps the visibility and keep pushing women in comics, and keep taking some of these comic book jobs that are coming my way, and also keep continuously produce my own stuff. So I think I'm on the right path. I'm just gonna keep heading in that direction.
Amy?
I think same, we just do as we do, I hate saying follow our passion, but that is super important. Like just chasing for clicks, chasing for likes. I don't think that is a good way to go, but you do need to get off your ass and do things. You need to create, you need to finish what you do. My goal is to finish, even in a pandemic, I got a whole list of stuff. If you don't finish, you don't have anything. And if I don't produce next year, no one's going to remember I even existed. I mean, that's how it works. So I don't really care. I shouldn't say I don't really care. I need to do what I'm doing. I don't really care. If I'm getting likes because of my food, my food posts, that doesn't help me.
Donuts, Amy.
Yeah, that does increase visibility. By the way, put up a nice picture of a donut in your Instagram, you get more likes than your actual work.
Yes, and I forgot to mention that Regine is a professional kneader, and she's knitting, and she has like those on top of everything. It's great.
I crochet. It's wonderful.
Crochet. I'm sorry. I apologize. I've not been French enough today. Crochet. It's for you. Exactly. Okay. I'm just going to conclude with one thing that is probably going to resonate with a lot of people and a lot of creators, and that I got from Joe Kubert. I had the privilege of interviewing him before he passed away in 2011, I think, if I remember correctly. And he was saying to his two sons, who are, of course, Adam and Andy Kubert, like great talents in our industry, and he was one of the founders. And he always said to them, if you are going to stick in this industry, get up and get it done. And I think the best thing to do when you're a creator, wherever you're coming from, is to achieve and to make comics and show it to the world. And you were all absolutely right in saying that. We have web comics, we have webtoons, we have all digital arenas now where people can express themselves. Would you have any final specific advice for young creators of color or minorities? I would always say it like minorities because like it's like broader than that.
I'll plagiarize Ramon, but I think one of the best things I learned from him was that we need to really network with our class or our peers, because as we continue to achieve success individually, it's going to only help create and foster more visibility for our peers if we really stay connected. And so opportunities like this and all the other ones that he's generated for the community are amazing for getting your next gig, or maybe having the next opportunity to maybe show your work to somebody who can do something.
10 seconds, quickly, ladies.
I would say, if you're looking to, again, break into something where you are not the norm, you're underrepresented in that community, you need to go find your advocates within that community. They need to be your support. It's very hard to do it by yourself. And it's very hard to do it with your peers if everyone's outside. You're going to have to figure out who in the inside is going to help you out and who's going to support you. And hopefully there's someone in there who can do that for you.
Yeah, mentor. Regine?
I definitely would say to study your craft, whatever you're doing. Put your best foot forward with it, and accumulate as much knowledge as you can. So if there are books on writing comics, read those. Read comics, of course. If you're an artist, read books about drawing, comic book drawing specifically, as well as life drawing. And there are a lot of free classes online as well for comic book writing, for comic book drawing. There are drink and draws that are online. There are life drawing classes online. There are models that are just putting up free images on Instagram that you can draw. So all these resources are out there. You just have to look for them.
All right. Please remind us where we can find you guys.
Oh, so yeah, Twitter, Amy Chu. I'm mostly on Twitter, but I'm also on Instagram if you want to look at donuts and things like that. And I'm also on Facebook at I Write Comics.
You can find me at Lock It Down, LOCKETT down on Twitter, at Lock It Down Official on Instagram, and of course at Women in Comics NY on Twitter.
Awesome. Omar?
And you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Omar F. Mirza, or www.thelastandsars.com.
Awesome. You guys were great, and thank you very much for your time. And it was a pleasure. And despite the technical issues, I'm sorry on Spectrum's behalf that we had to experience all that.
We're never going to get Spectrum.
Yeah, I know. But I have no choice here. It's a Spectrum or Spectrum. So it's...
Oh, that's
bad. Yes.
Monopoly, bad.
All buildings, all area, no choice. Anyhow, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and let's all read comics, guys. Thank you.